and that if one goes back to the 1300s, 1400s, I'm not talking about where things are boletes or meteorites or atmospheric things. I'm talking about where people have seen, guess what, the three little objects that make a triangle passing through the sky, so people have been seeing these long before we could even get off the ground.
Right.
I think both you and I know that this is not covert top secret technology.
Yeah, yeah. But the military, it seems from what I can see, monitor it at some level and know about it. Would you go along with that or not? Do you think they've got one eye on it with their tracking stations? Because they must know when the airspace has been incurred upon.
Absolutely, because we know that back in the 40s there were lots of sightings of UFOs that were tracked on radar, and I know that in those days. And many of them were plotted going over the East Anglia coast, and coming back over the East Anglia coast. I don't know how that fits into it, but yes, I mean, I'm sure they do. So I know where you're heading, and I agree with you that they must know what is going on. But clearly, and let's be honest about this, they don't want any of this to be published or known about, because it's going to cause problems, isn't it?
Yeah. All right, the next case we're going to talk about was at a place called Wufferton Railway Station in Shropshire, 1961.
That's correct, yes. That was a gentleman called Eric Lewis. He was living in Coventry and contacted us, must be 7 or 8 years ago, and we interviewed him about what he'd seen when he was working at the railway station. We even went to the railway station, which is still next to I think it's the BBC transmitters. But the transmitters are still there, but certainly the railway station is not a working one. And he said that he was accompanied by the station master, a colleague at the time, and crossing the platform bridge at 6 p.m. in January 61. He was on his way home when he saw a grey-white object resembling a double-yolked egg, about 20 feet in diameter and 70 feet in length, hovering a few hundred feet in the air, close to the BBC transmission masts. A couple of 100 feet away, it was rotating anti-clockwise, and it was spilling out constant streams of multicoloured light. And then he says that a couple of minutes later there was a subtle change. The pulsing stopped, allowing us to see a cigar shape with 9 or 10 lights. And then it oscillated, moved across the landscape, scattering particles of golden flecks of light. And of course, I think at that stage he shouted to the station master, get a camera, but by the time they got a camera, it had gone. But talking about that case always reminds me, and I can't remember what year it was. It was a guy called Dennis Maycroft, I think. His sightings in the books around about that period. But he was working on a BBC mast, doing some work up in Yorkshire, when this object was seen by them, and he told me that the man in charge of the station then drove straight off to London to contact the BBC and tell them what had been seen.
Now, there's a place in Lincolnshire called Mablethorpe, I think, on the coast. And just south of there, there's a transmitter, a big radio transmitter, and allegedly in the 1990s that became known as Alien Tower, because the locals had had so many UFO sightings near it. Do you think there's an attraction to radio equipment with UFOs? Because there's more than one case of them appearing.
I would, yes. Yeah, they're obviously an attraction, in the same way that a lot of these objects have been seen over power stations, and over reservoirs, and over radio transmission masts. Whether they're actually, if you like, interpreting the signals or information is a matter I don't know. But you're quite right. A lot of them have been seen over there, and I don't really understand.
It's been suggested that the power ones, maybe they can take power from the grid. I don't know, but
I think
that's been suggested. And in particular, nuclear stations, I think, get more than their fair share of UFO sightings.
Yeah.
Is there
I think
many
you're right. They're utilising. They're certainly taking some type of energy. Whether I mean, you're an ex-engineer.
Yeah. It's
in this.
Obviously, there's no way I can think of any conventional way that how they could do it. Obviously, because it's technology we don't know about. So unless they would have, from my knowledge, they would have to get two big crocodile clips and, and put them on the wires to get the electricity. But in theory, you could do that. Because they're not insulated.
But could it be the fields of energy
that
they're tapping into as opposed to the electricity itself? In the same way that I've often pondered on whether they're taking something out of people.
Yeah, well, there is energy given off in fields, but it's so small. It would be useless to use conventionally, but it's. I don't know what they might be actually tapping into, but it's.
We shouldn't forget the many occasions when people have been exposed to, have seen a UFO, and they've got reasonably close to it, close enough to complain the next day that they've got a tanning of the skin.
Yes.
And they've also got strange marks. And again, I'm not saying that proves to me beyond doubt that they've been abducted, because I don't know. But what I am saying is that people sometimes will say that they have they've got a tanned face. They've got I mean, there's so many cases that I've come across involving this, where people have got a burnt face but not burnt arms because they've got a shirt on, or they've got a coat or whatever. It's so many cases like that, and other cases where. I mean, a classic case, one that really causes you to puzzle, was a lady down in Warminster who interviewed her some years ago. She and her daughter, young daughter, were at home, and the girl said to the mum, she said, "Mummy, look at that in the sky." And there was a cigar-shaped object in the sky. And they both looked at it, and then it moved away. But the next day, the daughter said, "Mummy, I've got something on my stomach, my tummy." And the mother looked, and there was three. I mean, this is where it gets so incredibly bizarre, almost unbelievable, but undoubtedly true. The daughter had 3 marks on her stomach in a triangular formation, and the mother had the same. But then, to make it even weirder, the husband, who was working away 20 miles, who was nowhere near the scene of the sighting, also had the same marks on his stomach. And this was not the only case where this had happened. And again, another case at Chitter and in Warminster, where the couple came across a triangular object in the field, and the woman told me, I think a couple of years ago, and this wasn't known about, but her husband continually complained right up to the day of his death that he had he still had the marks on his stomach, and they used to give him a lot of discomfort, and that wasn't known about. So again, I know none of it makes sense, any of this, but that's the great thing about UFOs. They don't make sense in a way that our biggest problem is we try and apply rationality and logic and say this should happen and that should happen, but it doesn't.
Well, with regards whether people are being taken and X, Y, and Z happen to them for whatever particular program it is that they're running, that goes very deep, and perhaps we can touch on that in the next show, John.
Yes.
Okay, but that's all we've got time for the first interview. But we're going to discuss the second volume in some detail in the next show. So
okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.